Welcome to Athletes on Balance, where we talk to athletes, coaches, and experts about mental health in sports. This is a stigma-free zone for inner thoughts and outer conversations. We're helping athletes and anyone with mental health challenges perform at their best, on and off the field.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Athletes on Balance. I'm your host, Walt, founder and CEO of On Balance Health. Today, I'm joined by Cailin Bracken, a college lacrosse player, and more importantly, a mental health advocate and spokesperson. Cailin plays attack at Vanderbilt University and is about to enter her senior year. She has made the American Athletic Conference Academic Honor Roll multiple times. Before Vanderbilt, Cailin attended Ridgewood High School, I know people from there, by the way, where she helped her team, not your year, to a state championship in 2018 and earned several lacrosse honors, including being named to the 2018-19 Under Armour All-American Highlight Team. Wow, impressive. During her freshman season at Vanderbilt, Cailin made the courageous decision to step away from the Commodores and leave campus to focus on her mental health. She eventually returned to the sport she loves and to the team she loves, and what came next was even more impactful than anything she's ever done on the field. Cailin wrote a letter to college sports. It was a heartfelt, emotional piece in which she issued a demand to everyone in college sports to improve care for mental health of student athletes. Cailin's powerful letter is a reminder that many athletes still struggle in silence. We must do everything we can to help them. I've mentioned this before. Mental health is important to me and personal, as I have managed a bipolar disorder throughout my 4-decade business career. And looking back, perhaps even in my playing days as a quarterback at Ohio State and Georgia. Cailin, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. That was the kindest, most flattering introduction. It was my favorite one I've heard. I loved that you said more importantly than a lacrosse player, a mental health advocate. That means more to me than I could possibly put into words. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're gonna talk more about it, but I think what you've done on that front obviously will be ultimately, more of a legacy. During your freshman year at Vanderbilt, when you were playing lacrosse, you decided to step away from the game and leave campus to focus on your mental health. Can you tell us what led to that decision?
Yeah, so I actually left campus once and I stepped away from lacrosse twice. Once knowing that I planned to come back, and then the second time very much convinced that it was the end of my lacrosse career. So I got to college during the fall of 2020, which for anyone who began college during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, it was a very isolating environment, especially Vanderbilt is a medical campus. So there was a lot of precautions and extra precautions, rightfully so. But I got on campus in August of 2020 and I was struggling with an eating disorder and I was struggling with depression. And basically a month into school, I had gotten the coronavirus. I had been quarantined for 2 weeks with a teammate. And during that time, our coaches gave us the option because of COVID that if we wanted to, quote unquote, opt out of either the fall season, the spring season, or the whole year of lacrosse, that our scholarships would still be intact and they would be protected. And as soon as I heard that option in probably September of 2020, I was like, oh, I need that. So I was acutely aware of the fact that going home would be something that would be beneficial for me. And even my parents were like, are you sure you don't want to just wait it out and see if it's an adjustment period? And I think one of my advantages, just being, I guess, a mature, reflective human being, has been that I know myself well enough to know whether I needed to stay or whether I needed to go home. And I knew what was best for me, which is amazing because I don't think everyone can say that. And oftentimes it's like your parents know what's best. Right. I trusted myself on that. And I went home for like a month and a half and I just started therapy and I was working actually as a personal trainer, which was a job that was not for me, but it was fun to learn that it wasn't for me. And then I got back to campus at the end of the fall and I was like, I'm ready. Okay. Like I thought that I had really overcome all the hurdles I was going to endure, which was perhaps naive, but then I came back to lacrosse. I re-opted onto the team. My coaches were excited. I was excited. And I still was struggling with how much I wanted to identify with my lacrosse identity, because it kind of felt like if you were going to be a college athlete, you had to take on that identity wholly and completely. And I wasn't ready to do that because I do have so many other interests, and I feel like there's so much more depth there, as there is for every college athlete. It's not like I'm special in that regard.
Right.
And so I came back, and the spring season started in January. And that was when I realized, like, okay, well, this actually isn't totally going away. Like, I was in recovery for my eating disorder, and I was still in therapy. And those things in and of themselves were like full-time jobs. The amount of energetic and emotional time I had to commit to those things was pretty dramatic and intense. And then I also had lacrosse, my first college lacrosse season, and we started playing really quickly. And I was getting some playing time, which was really exciting, but I felt like compounded the pressure I was feeling to like come back and kind of like quote unquote prove myself, especially as a freshman playing in a college scheme where there's the game is faster, people are bigger, people are stronger, and it's just like hard to kind of get into
Right.
as a freshman. And so partially through the year, I'd only played in a few games, and I went to my coaches and I was like, hey guys, obviously you guys know I've been struggling with my mental health this year. And I think what's best for me and my relationship with lacrosse would be for me to redshirt and take a mental health redshirt, so that I didn't have to worry about the pressure of getting on the field, and I could just enjoy practice. I could feel like I'm getting better, but not have to worry about actually starting. I mean, that wasn't really a conversation at all, but as a freshman, you're kind of like, well, if they want me to be out there, what more do I need to do? And I wanted to actually just take that option away from myself completely and be able to really be present and enjoy it. And so I redshirted for most of my freshman season, and my coaches were really supportive of that. They wanted me to fall in love with lacrosse again. They wanted me to find the same kind of passion for it that I had had when they recruited me. And I wasn't having the greatest time redshirting. It was fine. Like, it wasn't anything really to write home about. It was still COVID, and we were still playing an abbreviated schedule, playing the same teams twice in a weekend, which was already stressful. And
So
throughout all of this,
you
I
were
was
practicing though.
yeah. So when you redshirt, you still are in practice every day. Um, so I was still practicing and still like going to every team event. It was really just like only at game time I would like warm up, and then I wouldn't play. And at the end of my freshman year in April, I sustained a concussion during practice one day. And that to me was like this symbol of I'd already been struggling. And I remember just like crying to my dad, who was also a college lacrosse player during his day, and he had stepped away and then went back. And so I just remember crying to my dad and being like, I just don't think I want to do this anymore. I don't think it's serving me. And then later that week, I ended up getting a concussion. And that to me was this symbol of this is hurting your mind more than you really realize it is, more than you're giving it credit for. And so after getting that concussion, which was, I've had 5 concussions, that was my fourth, and it was the worst by far that I've had. And so I was out of commission for a few weeks. I didn't go to the playoffs with my team. And at that point, I went to my coaches and I was like, I really need to step away. I don't think I want to finish the season. And they were supportive. They've always been really accommodating and understanding with me, especially I think because I've been so forthcoming. And basically I went to my coaches and I was like, I'm just going to go home. I don't need to finish the season with you guys. And they were like, totally understand. You're concussed and also seem to be struggling with your relationship with lacrosse. So I went home, my team went to the playoffs, and it after a few weeks of like really deliberating on this question of will I continue playing lacrosse or not, there were moments where I was so ready to just cut the cord and be like, this is the end of my lacrosse career. And then I had to talk through some really realistic things with my parents. Like, well, what are you going to learn being a college athlete that will help you later in your career? What does this look like financially if you make a decision that you don't have the athletic support anymore? And it doesn't sound as heroic when you talk about it that way. And it was not by any means like a brave decision that I was making. It was ultimately, it was a decision that I realized I was making out of fear, which is why I ended up continuing to play lacrosse, was because it presented me this challenge that I knew if I overcame that challenge, I would be a better person because of it. And I knew that the challenges that being a collegiate athlete presented to me were worth the stress that I felt like I had to overcome or I had to learn to be comfortable with or work with. Um, but when I tell that story, it's really important to me that I acknowledge that for some people, quitting in that instance could be the greatest thing that they could possibly do for themselves. For me, I knew that I would have been quitting out of fear.
I want to go back to your letter, if you don't mind. So at one point in the letter you write, the more we resist the idea that we're allowed to stop or to walk away or to take a day off or to admit to someone that we're struggling, the more we begin to feel trapped. The more we feel backed up against the wall with no other options than to take the worst way out. And we all know what that worst way out is. Why do you think this culture has persisted for so long in sports?
I think so long as it is celebrated and commercialized, it'll persist. And that's not to say anything bad about the brands that have marketed this mindset of don't stop, like rub some dirt on it, those things, and never take like no days off, even these kind of like little mechanisms just linguistically where we're making people who are young athletes, there's like 6-year-olds buying little shirts that say no days off. And you internalize this mindset where to take a day off or to tell someone you're struggling or to show any sort of quote unquote weakness becomes problematic to your career as an athlete.
Look, you're going to get out of school and you're going to see this in the next world. In my world, I'm in technology, and if you want to be very good at something like sports, the competitive high achievement mentality, the discipline, the organizational skills, the work ethic, all the things that you have, right, as a student athlete to be successful, they translate, into the next part of life. And if you want to be a great teacher, and if you want to be a great mentor to somebody from a business perspective, you want to be, build a great technology companies, whatever your ambitions might be. Yeah, you're right. They all come with a sacrifice. And now, because we're all more educated than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago, what's the cost of that sacrifice? And can you have balance? Can you balance it at the collegiate athletic stage, and can you balance it at the professional athletic stage? Can you balance it later in life? And, what is that sacrifice? I do think, Cailin, I'd like to hear your perspective on this. I speak about this. I do think part of mental health is mental strength. I've heard Michael Phelps talk about it. Of course, there are many times you do want to get out of bed and jump in a pool, at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, right? There does come, that's that next trigger, of the mental strength. And, where's that line, right? If you want to make a parallel between the stigma and which keeps people from getting out and getting care earlier because of the stigma and becoming judged. Well, let's go to the knee. Let's go to the ankle. Let's go to the shoulder, right? Where's the line where your ankle's bothering you, your knee's bothering you, and you kind of work through it, right? You kind of push through it. Your hamstring's bothering you a little bit. You heat it up. You put some ice on it afterwards. You take some ibuprofen, right? There's that line, but you keep playing. And if you're not mentally feeling great and you've kind of had a bad day, where's that line? You push yourself through. You get out of bed, you get to practice, you push yourself through. However, if the knee fails, right? If the knee fails or the hamstring is really pulled, what do? You go get treatment, right? Right away, right? Because it's affecting your capability to participate. And as you well know, when you have something like that, if you can't walk properly and you're limping around, it has ramifications beyond your athleticism. Don't you think this is the same thing with the mental thing? I mean, where you that line between, push myself through it with mental strength, even though I don't feel like doing something today or, for the last 3 days, and to the point of I need care. I need to go get care right away. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see a parallel between the two?
Certainly. I think that it's delicate with your mental health because I think not a lot of people are at the emotional intelligence level for themselves to understand when something gets to a point where they're like, oh, I need care. Like, I have people come to me, which I have no credentials in mental health beyond my own experience, and will say, this is what I'm experiencing. And I'm like, you are dealing with something far more serious than you even realize. That's when you need to ask for the help of a professional. And I think it is true that discipline is something that is you need to have discipline. And I think that's sometimes when I speak to groups of athletes or I speak to people in the professional sports world, it's a difficult line to toe when I'm saying, like, yes, we should be a little bit more gentle with people, but also, yes, there are things you learn in sport that is integral to who you want to be if you want to be someone who is upstanding as you're growing up and as you're going into other industries or other, fields. So I think that with your mental health, you can actually use a lot of the things that you learn in sport to deal with your mental health. For example, like discipline can look like keeping promises to yourself so that it creates confidence. The more confidence you have, the better you'll perform on the field. The more confidence you have, the more easily you'll be able to share your feelings with people. You'll be able to feel secure in telling people what you're struggling with if you are having a bad day. And also, one of my coaches actually just sent this video in our group chat of the Duke women's basketball coach talking about how she's talking about life and sport. And of course, those two things can be connected of it never gets easier. You just get better at dealing with the hard. And that resonated with me. And Walt, you and I were talking about this earlier when we were chatting about our mental health. And I was diagnosed with OCD last August, so basically a year ago. And anyone who's struggled with OCD or has like repetitive thought loops or any mental illness, frankly, understands really that not every day is going to be perfect in your mind. Not every day is going to be easy. And there may be some days where you get less sleep or there's an event that happens that triggers your nervous system response. And suddenly you're having this like totally catastrophic reaction to something that maybe is not as big of a deal, but because you have anxiety or because you have OCD or depression, it seems worse than it is and it exacerbates it. And I feel like I have learned how to, like, those thoughts haven't become any different than maybe they were a year ago. They're far more infrequent, but I've become so much better at dealing with them. And I now understand how to react to them in order to neutralize those thoughts or how to respond to them to be like, okay, well, that's a non-issue to me. And I think you learn a lot of that in sport of dealing with the hard. And yes, somebody could put you on the line and tell you to run 6 300s. Will it be easy? No. But the more you talk to yourself and say, you've got this and you're going to be okay and your body can handle this, the more you say to yourself and your mental health, you can handle this. But maintaining an acute awareness of the fact when you're there on that line and you're like, I can't handle this alone. Maybe you're on your 5th 300 and your ankle is sprained. That's not time to run another one. That's time to say, hey, trainer, I need some help. Can you tape me up? Can you come look at this? I need an ice pack. And same thing with your mental health. If you're on, again, like that proverbial line and you're like, I need help, it is the greatest thing you can do for yourself. Athletes are obsessed with self-optimization, as am I. And that's why I'm so committed to my mental health, is because I want to be the best version of myself that I can be. And if asking someone for help is going to get me there, then you better believe I'm going to ask the right people for help and ask them to help me develop myself in that sense and not be ashamed of the fact that I needed to ask.
Well, that was really, really well said. And you did intersect what I was referring to, and that is when you go to the trainer when, you did all those 300s and your hamstrings bothering you, you seek help and you stop, right? And why wouldn't you do the same thing for your mental health? So I want to ask you this. You made the transition. You played at a very high level, achievement-wise in high school. With all these aspirations coming into Vanderbilt to come to the next level, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to people in your same position coming out of high school and going to the next level to play a college sport?
I would say honestly, to set your intentions. And I'm huge on intentionality. It has changed my life. I set intentions every day, and it makes every day feel like there's something to achieve. And when my head hits the pillow every night, I feel like a deep sense of purpose. And I think had I gone into college with intentions, I would have gotten a lot more out of my freshman year with intention. I, of course, got a great deal out of my freshman year because I was basically trial and error. But I think if I were going into college, I would want to have a clear sense of like what I want to get out of my freshman year, what I want to get out of my first semester. Do I want to make friends that are outside of my sport? Do I want to succeed in my classes? Is my main focus thriving in, the weight room or in conditioning? Do I want to be open with my coaches, and setting those intentions of like, what do you want to create? Because maintaining an awareness of why you're there. Like, I think for my freshman year, I was like, why am I here? I felt like I was lacking intention. And anytime that I feel like I'm lacking intention, it's like I'm not even there at all in any situation, not just with lacrosse. So I honestly would say to set your intentions, and they can be as specific as you want, or they can be as vague as you want, like be present, work hard. And I recommend specificity in that sense because it helps you come up with ways to actually achieve those intentions. And also, I would say set a precedent of talking to people, set a precedent of being the person on your team who is shamelessly vulnerable. I think it's so funny when people are like, "Oh, you're so brave for, sharing your story." I'm like, it is truly like my second nature to share this, and I love talking about it. If anyone is struggling, knowing that I can share my story pretty effortlessly and that they can maybe find resonance is really special to me. And if you go into college and you're like, I want to be that person, I want to be the person who my coaches know they can come to for an honest take on like, how are you feeling? Set that precedent. You can go into your coach's office the first week you're at school and say, hey, I just want to be really intentional about creating an open relationship with you guys. And I want to be able to talk about how I'm doing with you guys because I know that freshman year, notoriously, not only freshman year, of course, other years in college, being a college athlete is a difficult thing to do. Right. But being able to say, like, I want to be able to come to you guys. So let's be intentional about maybe setting a meeting every month just to check in. Because you can create those things. And I think people come from a background of being a little bit timid around coaches. And yes, you can respect your coaches and still be really open with them at the same time. And so that's probably the greatest advice that I could give to anyone going into college, whether they're D1, D2, D3, whatever sport they're playing.
Well, you're a wise soul because actually you echoed, with some different terminology, but you echoed some of the statements that Coach Saban had to say when he did the podcast, which is essentially, kind of have your game plans, have milestone game plans, in front of you. You've done so much to reduce the stigma already at this ripe old age of going into your senior year. Moving the needle. We're obviously having this conversation because you already have been moving the needle, and we're in the throes of trying to move the needle. What happens? What do you think we need to do to continue moving that needle for college athletes? Because as you know, it really starts at the high school level. I mean, or even beyond that, right?
Not younger, right?
Everybody moves up. You look at the pandemic that you referred to, you were discussing earlier. I mean, you came in at absolutely unprecedented times. I have a daughter that was in her last year playing D3 lacrosse with Franklin Marshall, going into her senior year. Same year you came in, March 2020, and their season got completely wiped out, right? But the kids that were in junior high school are right now coming in to their freshman year, or they're probably coming into their sophomore year. And they were under the pandemic and the isolation and all the uncertainties that happened in their high school. Well, now they're in college, right? And now they're college athletes. Mm-hmm. What do you think we need to do to help them and to help the future of the generations that are playing college sports?
It's an amazing question, and there are so many things that need to be done. I think incrementally, but the first thing I think that needs to change or be kind of invoked, I guess, is not just having a conversation about the mental health conversation. And that's kind of been my thesis of a lot of the work I've done over the past few months with different organizations and groups, of saying like, I'm so flattered that we have conversations like this, and I love to do it. And I think it's so important that people who have never heard a conversation like this have open ears while this conversation is happening. But then there's people who are educated in this space and who have, like you, the metrics to look at these things and be like, this is what we're looking at. But I don't think it's enough to just talk about it and acknowledge it. And people will constantly ask me, what sparked you to write this letter? And it's like, as much as I am so flattered that the letter resonated with people, like that was merely a spark that was supposed to light this fire. And I'm just as at fault as anyone else, because I have not created as much tangible change beyond, I think a lot more coaches are open to having conversations with their players, which is huge. And I don't want to discredit any of the work that I've done, but I do crave, truly is the best word I can use, progress. And I crave policy. And I spoke to you on the phone earlier about this, and I'm working on an act with Colton Underwood that's hopefully going to be passed in Congress. It's the TEAMS Act, so targeting emotional and mental stability. And that would basically codify the protection of student athlete mental health. And that's, of course, only targets really college athletes. And I want to go down to the bottom. Like, I want to be fixing the cultural issues, the structural issues in Pee Wee football, like places that I have really never experienced myself. I think there's so much nuance to the different experience of different sports and different genders and different people of different backgrounds, demographics being raised in sports. There's so much nuance, there's so much room for connection, there's so much room for progress. And so I think the number one thing I would like to see is some policy that indicates to high school level coaches, middle school coaches, all college coaches, that like this is not only a priority of the athlete, who maybe some people think we're like whining. It really is a priority of the country and the country's well-being, and this is a public health crisis. So that was kind of a loop-de-loop answer of really saying that I would love to see policy passed. I would love to see this policy passed in particular, and it's hard to come up with tangible change because you approach the entire world of college athletics and you're like, what can I possibly change here? How do I get into every administration and hold their hand until they have exactly the resources that I want? I also think, and I have been talking about this at length with people, that the most tangible change colleges could make, if there's any college coaches listening, is just having more providers specifically for each team. I think a huge issue is the fact that, for example, Vanderbilt has like 2 or 3 therapists that athletes are typically directed to. And I'm not even sure how many athletes we have, but you have hundreds of athletes who are being directed towards the same 3 therapists. And finding a therapist is truly like, you're like dating these people until you figure out what works for you. And I think the issue with having so few therapists on staff is that sometimes they're sports psychologists, and that's not what you need. Sometimes they can't speak to the background that a lot of other athletes have had. So for example, me going to see a therapist who looks like me, sounds like me, maybe is from the same area as me, is going to be different than maybe a Black football player going into the same office as that therapist. There probably wouldn't be as much resonance. And that's why there needs to be a variety and a diversity of providers on college athletic administration campuses to be able to provide for people and make them feel known and seen, and so athletes can establish authentic relationships with the people who are there to guide them and help them through what can be a really stressful process. Athletes seriously are one of the most vulnerable populations on college campuses to depression and suicide. And so having people there that are specifically ready to create a relationship with the athletes, right, for athletes, I think is so important.
Well, I mean, so you have the big macro esoteric description of, solving these problems at a very large level. But you and I talked about this a little bit on the phone, that, go down to the micro and start with what is needed now, right? What is needed now, and you said it, is they need programs. I mean, they need dedicated programs. They need to put resources and programs together where you do have people that understand the athlete, and they understand that their stresses and strains are different than the non-athlete, right? So there's somebody that's been in that world and understands that world, and a program to manage that, right? I mean, the smart coaches like your coach and some other coaches that I mentioned one earlier with Coach Saban, but the smart coaches, not only are they trying to take care of the human being, but let's be honest, they're trying to win games, right? They're trying to have success. And if you don't figure out, the intersection between mental and behavioral health and athletic performance, kind of shame on you, right? I mean, they go hand in hand. So, let's start with what's manageable, and that is, if you want to have healthy people on the field in competition, take care of their mental health to the same degree you take care of their physical health, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, this has been wonderful. You have in your younger years, you're well ahead of yourself. I would say that to you, Cailin. Your knowledge and your experience is it's very, very impressive to me, and I'm sure to our audience. And you're a great inspiration. So I do ask this at the end of interviews. You've had sounds like you've had some great people in your life. Can you speak to one person in particular that's been most inspirational?
Oh, I love that question. And I love that you ask it to everyone. I think the person in my life that has been the most inspirational to me has been my mom. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that their mom is their inspiration. My mom struggled with chronic illness as I was growing up, and also worked a full-time corporate job. And she ran triathlons when I was little, and was always just the most incredible mom. And I've watched her grow with me. Honestly, we've been on like similar paths with learning about ourselves and exploring spirituality and things like that. And so she's like my best friend in the world. And to be able to have gone through the past 2 years of immense growth alongside her has been the greatest privilege. I can't even imagine. I couldn't 3 years ago have imagined experiencing such a beautiful thing with my mom for both of us. And she just like has always been the first person after the lacrosse game. She could not care less about how I played. She is just the first person to be so excited to hang out with me. And it's so refreshing to be able to have someone who cares about lacrosse when I care about it, but is also so ready to compartmentalize that aspect of my life. And she's put so much into not only me as a lacrosse player, which it's an expensive sport, as you probably know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she just has done, she means the world to me, and I know she'll listen to this. And my parents have changed my life on so many fronts, but especially just the way that they have taught me to navigate the world, and the way that they've celebrated my advocacy, the way they've celebrated my vulnerability and reflected it is just outstanding. And I feel like the luckiest kid to have that relationship with.
You're extremely fortunate. What's your mom's name?
Megan.
Well done. Well done. You obviously you've raised a beautiful human being. Look, I want to say I'm delighted that you came on, and I thank you again for coming on and what you're doing right here, and what you're doing with your own program and your speaking engagements. You are inspiring a lot of people, and you're helping people. You might never know it, right? But that's okay. I mean, you don't always have to know, but I hope you keep up, this journey, and I hope you continue to thrive as you go through, life, right? And look, some things happen for a reason, and the fact that you kind of went through what you went through your freshman year is a game changer, right? It's a life changer, right? All of a sudden you got incredibly educated, and once you got incredibly educated and your self-awareness, everything I just heard is, you're better off for it, right? You're better off for it. It's unfortunately sometimes we have to go through our challenges and our dark days, to get to a better place. So thank you again. I've now got to say thank you to all of our followers. Stay tuned for more episodes to come soon. I'm Walt Norley. Take care, everyone. This is Athletes on Balance.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Athletes on Balance. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please follow us on your preferred podcast app to catch our next episode. Join our community by sharing with an athlete, mental health care provider, or coach in your circle.